Hello, and on behalf of the University of Michigan School of Information and Information Technology Services, welcome to a slightly delayed Data Privacy Day. My name is Sal Berman, and I'm the university's campus-side Chief Information Security Officer and Executive Director of Information Assurance, which includes university-wide responsibility for privacy. Before we get going, let me do a little bit of housekeeping. The event is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the event webpage. You can submit questions for the keynote speaker and the panelists through the webinar's Q&A feature. And once again, welcome to Data Privacy Day. Data Privacy Day is an annual international event that occurs on January 28th. On that day, the Convention for the Protection of Individuals with regard to automatic processing of personal data was opened for signature by the Council of Europe. As the day has evolved, it's taken on a broader meaning, and we at Michigan use it as a jumping off point to host numerous events to raise awareness, promote privacy and data protection best practices, all under the Privacy at Michigan umbrella. So why more than a day? Well, privacy, particularly in a pervasive digital age, is inexorably interwoven in myriad aspects of our lives and transcends borders, cultures, industries, and academic disciplines. And because at the University of Michigan, we value privacy as a human right and directly tie it to academic freedom, freedom of expression, student growth and development, and so much more. And so we recognize this is a daily proposition, not just one day a year at the end of January. The Privacy at Michigan event series seeks to engage the university community and the general public in ongoing, challenging conversations about privacy's important role in society. Today's keynote and panel discussion is just the first event for 2024. Our keynote speaker today, and someone who hasn't been at U of M in about a decade, is Professor Alessandro Acquisti, Trustees Professor of Information Technology and Public Policy at Carnegie Mellon's University Heinz College, and co-director of the CMU Center for Behavioral Decision Research. Professor Acquisti will present on the economics of privacy, and it's hard for me to believe that I've known Alessandro for about 20 years now, going back to a couple other institutions that I was a part of. Following his presentation, Alessandro will be joined by Kirsten Martin, the William P. and Hazel B. White Center Professor of Technology Ethics and Professor of IT Analytics and Operations in the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame. It's a mouthful, Kirsten. And Nazanin Andalibi, Assistant Professor, and Florian Schaub, Associate Professor, both at the University of Michigan School of Information. Now I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Andre Forte, Professor of Information and the new Dean of the University of Michigan School of Information. Dean Forte is herself a privacy scholar, so we're especially excited to welcome her and have her take part in today's event. Dean Forte, please take it away.
Thanks, Saul. And thanks to everyone for being here. I'm so honored to have been invited to this event. So I am brand new to the University of Michigan. I started my term as Dean of the School of Information earlier this month. And so it was really just thrilling to have the invitation to this event be one of sort of my first engagements at the university. So let me tell you a little bit about why I am so excited about this. First of all, I've long admired Alessandro's work on privacy, and I'm excited to learn from him today. As well as our panelists, Nazanin and Kirsten, and of course, Florian. It's an honor for the school to be a part of this opportunity to bring such important voices and perspectives together. And I can't say how much I'm excited about the existence of this event for a couple of other reasons, and I'll explain why I find it so compelling. So first, I count privacy among our grand socio-technical challenges. It's absolutely fundamental to the human experience. And when I say fundamental, I really mean like every waking moment fundamental. Maybe sleeping moments too, I don't know. I would challenge you to think of one thing you'll do this week that does not have some kind of implicit or explicit privacy consideration. This is unsurprising for the group of people assembled here, probably, but it's really hard to develop artifacts or systems or policies or processes or research methods that reflect the richness and diversity of human experiences of privacy in a way that feels authentic and that effectively support humans' needs. So these are problems that require interdisciplinary attention and understanding, and it's problems like these that created the need for schools like UMSI in the first place. So for that reason, it's especially gratifying to welcome you all here to talk about privacy in a way that really reflects the ethos of our school here. So that's one reason that I'm very excited about the event. And I have to also say another reason is that I'm just struck by the very existence of a Privacy at Michigan group, the way that this is constituted, not just as an event, but as an ongoing commitment and as a collaboration between information technology and an academic unit. So to have a privacy interest group that bridges information assurance and privacy related technology practices at the university with scholarship approaching privacy from different perspectives is really unique and powerful, I think. And it just further underscores my growing sense over the course of the past few weeks that that at Michigan, so many things are possible. This is really an incredible group here that's been assembled. So just before I hand it back over, just a word about myself, because I really look forward to meeting folks who are here in this Zoom right now. As was mentioned, I am a privacy researcher myself. I have a long-running interest in people's online lives and interactions, and the influence of technologies on those. And in recent years, I've really been focused on how marginalized groups and targets of harassment are represented in research and discourse around privacy. So I look forward to many future conversations with the folks who are here today. So with thanks to the organizers of this event, Florian, Saul, and Svetla, I will turn the stage over to Florian.
Thanks so much, Andrea, and welcome to the University of Michigan and the School of Information. We're definitely richer with your presence here. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Alessandro Acquisti. Dr. Alessandro Acquisti is the Trustees Professor of Information Technology and Public Policy at Carnegie Mellon University's Heinz College. He's co-director of the CMU Center for Behavioral Decision Research. He's a fellow of the Ponemon Institute and a member of the CMU Cyber Security and Privacy Institute. Alessandro's research, as you're going to learn in a moment today, investigates the economics and behavioral economics of privacy. And his studies have been published in leading journals across diverse disciplines, such as in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, the Journal of Consumer Research, Marketing Science, Information Systems Research, the Journal of Comparative Economics, and the ASM Transactions on the Internet, and many, many more, but I'm not going to list them all. Alessandro has been the recipient of the PET Award for Outstanding Research in Privacy Enhancing Technologies, the IBM Best Academic Privacy Faculty Award, the Heinz College's School of Information Teaching Excellence Award, and various Best Paper Awards. He has been invited to be part of the Federal Trade Commission's Privacy Roundtables and to co-chair the Cyber Economics track at the National Cyber Leap Year Summit as part of the NIDR-D program under guidance from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Public Response to Alerts and Warnings using social media and associated privacy considerations. And Alessandro's accolades just continue. And it's a great pleasure, Alessandro, to have you here. Welcome, Alessandro. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Florian. Thank you. So thank you, Andrea, for having me here. It's such a pleasure. And congratulations, Andrea. Michigan is very fortunate to have you there. And I am very fortunate to be here tonight and spend some time with you and share the stage with Kirsten and Naz. I very much look forward to the panel following my presentation. I'm absolutely honored to be spending the Privacy Day or a Privacy Day with you today. We'll be talking about privacy. We'll be talking about the economics of privacy, which is my field of research. But I promise you that I will try not to make it too much inside baseball. So you don't need to be an economist to follow my talk. There will be something for economists for sure, and hopefully something for those who don't know much about economics, because my talk will be about in a way the interactions, the cross-pollination between the economics of privacy and other fields. I will be using what I like to call the hourglass style of talk, meaning I will talk very, very broad, and then I will narrow down and I will present the results of one particular study, which is unpublished, by the way, and then I will close again with big open issues, big open questions. So opening large means telling you what the economics of privacy is about. Economics of privacy is about trade-offs, trade-offs related to personal data protection and sharing. But it is not a new field of research. It has a excellent pedigree. It started back in the late 1970s, early 1980s with Chicago school scholars such as Posner and Stigler. And for a while, there was not much attention within economics to privacy, other than those few papers in the early 1980s and a bunch of papers in the mid-1990s. And then the field exploded due to the internet, and it has finally entered mainstream today. By mainstream, I mean it has entered the economic mainstream. For instance, with some colleagues, I was honored to write a review of the economics of privacy for the Journal of Economic Literature, which is the main outlet for reviews of a field within economics. The NBR, the famous National Bureau of Economic Research, organized a number of workshops led by my colleagues and friends, Catherine Tucker and Avi Goldfarb, dedicated to the economics of privacy. So these are signs that the economics of privacy has made it into the economic mainstream, but I would claim it has also made it into the policy mainstream, in that economic considerations or economic references have appeared in the text of important regulations or directive, from the GDPR to the California Consumer Privacy Act. You can find economic considerations pertaining to personal data in policymakers and presidential candidates' speeches. You see the interest that the Federal Trade Commission has been having recently on commercial surveillance and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to do today with you is to sort of take stock of this development. And most of what I will be discussing is based on a piece which is just about to come out in a few months. It's a chapter in a volume edited by Catherine Tucker and Avi Goldfarb, published by NBR, in which I talk about, in a way, the successes of the field, but also what I believe we did not get entirely right. In a way, it's kind of like a love letter to my own field, a tough love, perhaps. And indeed, today, I will focus on what we didn't get right, what I believe we got wrong. But I will also end with a note of optimism, in that there is always time to do better. And I will highlight what I very personally believe are the directions that we should consider to keep furthering this field of research. Why am I framing it? I hope not too negatively, but why am I framing in terms of what we got wrong? Well, I feel that there is an original sin in the economics of privacy. And the original sin, which paradoxically is also the reason of its success, is that economists have a very peculiar view of privacy, a very peculiar definition and notion of privacy, which dates back to the 1980s. And it dates back to the writing of an extremely influential economist, a giant in the economics and law research field, Richard Posner. Richard Posner was indeed one of the intellectual giants who first started talking about privacy from an economics perspective. Here, for instance, is a article that he wrote and published in 1981 in the American Economic Review. For the non-economist among you, AER is basically the top, or one of the very top journals in the field. And Richard Posner, talking about privacy, makes three pretty important claims. I hope you will be able to see them on the screen. I don't know exactly what kind of resolution you have, but the first claim is that privacy, the aspect of privacy which is important for economists, is the concealment of information. Okay, so privacy is concealment of information. Second, the information that people want to conceal is negative information. And third, by reducing the availability of this information in the marketplace, privacy creates economic inefficiencies. Now, although we have made much progress in our field in terms of sophistication of our thinking around privacy, sophistication of our analysis, sophistication of our models, I'm going to claim that we are still affected quite a bit by this definition of privacy. And I will discuss why it is to some extent problematic. In fact, I will try to contrast how economists tend to think about privacy in the Posnerian mold versus how other privacy scholars in computer and social sciences think about privacy. And of course, I will necessarily be generalizing quite a bit here. You can certainly add a hashtag not all economists. I will mention from time to time exceptions, but I feel that my generalization is not too aggressive, is not too ungenerous. So privacy by economists is seen as concealment. We know, those of us who work on privacy and are open to other disciplines, that privacy is seen as something more complex, more nuanced and richer in other disciplines. Privacy as a process of boundary regulation, for instance, which includes both concealing and sharing. Both are embodiments of privacy management. This may sound like a subtle difference. I hope to convince you that it is a fundamental difference in terms of how we interpret the results of results, how we interpret the results coming from a young field of research. Privacy as personal information. Economists mostly focus on concealment of personal data. So privacy as protecting, shielding, hiding personal data. Privacy scholars in other fields look at a larger, a more varied set of dimensions of privacy, bodily privacy, decisional autonomy, even liberty and dignity. If you, as an economist, look at privacy as concealment, specifically concealment of personal information, then you will look at the market behavior of people. So what people do in the marketplace. You will notice that few people use technology such as Brave or Tor or PGP, whereas almost everyone uses things like Twitter and Facebook or Snapchat, and you will conclude that people don't care about privacy because they love to disclose. And essentially, you will interpret reveal preferences, which is an econ jargon, as suggesting people don't really care. They say they do, but they don't really care. If you take a richer view of privacy, you realize that actually the usage of Facebook is not compatible with the desire for privacy. People, in fact, try to look for privacy and try to find it even in public spaces. In fact, let me divert here for a few seconds to give you some examples. Contrary to the notion that the modern people don't really look for privacy, don't engage in privacy-seeking behaviors. In fact, privacy-seeking behaviors are everywhere. They're everywhere in the offline world. These are just examples which I base off, I've not taken directly, but I base off the work of Irwin Altman, the American social psychologist, to whom we owe the definition of privacy as a process of boundary regulation. And in fact, he pointed out that these behaviors are so ubiquitous and common that they happen without us even being aware of them. But it's not just a offline phenomenon. I'm going to claim that online, we engage in privacy management all the time, continuously, sometimes without even realizing. When we shut off the video on our Zoom calls, when we alternate between personal private versus public facing email accounts, and so on and so forth. And by the way, the evidence of privacy seeking behavior is not just anecdotal. There are plenty of lab experiments, surveys, field experiments that prove that. I cannot list them here. I don't have enough time or space. In the chapter that I mentioned a few slides and a few minutes ago, you can find many more references, which means that if you take a Posnerian view of privacy as concealment, you will think that the reason for the privacy paradox, the famous privacy or infamous privacy paradox, is that people don't care. If you take a richer Altmanian interpretation of privacy behavior, you realize that people can simultaneously desire privacy a desire sharing. There is no contradiction, but the problem is that it's very difficult to reach the desired balance between sharing and protecting online for a number of economic and behavioral hurdles that I and others in the field have examined over the past 15 years. As a matter of fact, I cannot stop myself from plugging a semi-recent paper that I wrote with Laurie Cranor and Jessica Colnago on the fact that there is a reverse privacy paradox too. So if you're not tired already of the privacy paradox, here it is for you, the reverse privacy paradox. Essentially, privacy-seeking behaviors among people who actually claim the privacy is not that important to them. We actually found that it is very, very common. We did a study in which we found that even among people who claim privacy not to be important to them or to society, the incidence of privacy-seeking behaviors is actually quite high. Now, going back to my story, contrasting and juxtaposing privacy for economists, privacy for scholars outside of economics, the next point is that if you believe that privacy is concealment of personal data, and if you believe they reveal preferences, tell you that people don't care. And if you also believe in a rational choice applied to privacy, the notion that people make well-informed, utility-maximizing decisions in the privacy space, then you will conclude that government regulation is not that important in the privacy sphere. In fact, as Posner would have said, is actually detrimental. It creates inefficiencies. If you instead look at privacy as a much more nuanced process of boundary regulation, but you realize that people face behavioral and economic hurdles, which doesn't mean that people are stupid, or doesn't mean that they don't care, or doesn't mean that they don't try to sometimes maximize, attain a satisfying level of utility. It simply means that there are systemic barriers which stop people from reaching the degree of privacy they want, especially online. Then if you believe all of this, then you conclude that actually privacy regulation as a role may be really important. So in a nutshell, if you have been following me until here, you will not be surprised by what I'm about to tell you, which is, I believe my field has grown a lot in the last 40 years since Posner, and that's wonderful. It's amazing, it's exciting. However, we have also focused on a somewhat narrow vision of privacy, which is different from the view of privacy among colleagues of us in our disciplines. Because of that, empirical economic research, as incredibly sophisticated and valuable as it is, has focused a little too much, this is my personal view, on issues such as the cost of privacy regulation. After the GDPR, there has been an avalanche of papers trying to see how regulation decrease this or that economic variable. That's okay, but we, in a way, we are overlooking other crucial economic issues, not just ethical or moral issues. Also, I believe, because of the arguments I presented in the prior slides, that we have somewhat failed to and fully grasp the implications of behavioral research on privacy. Again, the message is not that people are irrational, they're stupid, they don't try to use information strategically, although people do choose sharing and hiding strategically to some extent. The issue is to highlight the hurdles that they face in doing so. And because all of that, there is an economic argument, I believe, for privacy regulation. Vice versa, I feel that unless we properly contextualize the results from my field, we risk that our increasingly sophisticated models and empirical results don't really give us a full picture of the role and implications of privacy for individuals and for society at large, okay? Essentially, what I fear may be happening is that more and more economics and economic thinking is used to create a debate around privacy, which I encapsulate in this imperfect metaphor of a scale, a scale balance, where on one side we have economic arguments that favor more data. On the other side, we have ethical and moral arguments that favor more privacy. So I see more and more often the economic debate around privacy stressing the economic benefits of data. And to those, we contrast the moral argument for privacy. And of course, much of the economics attention goes there in demonstrating that, yes, there is value from data. Of course, there is. And once we have a regulation of protection of data, we decrease benefits, we decrease innovation, we decrease this or that outcome. Well, I have problems, significant problems in the debate being framed in this way. And my chapter in NPR, the one I mentioned earlier, is an attempt to naively, perhaps, reframe the debate by pointing out that if we were really to frame the debate this way, we would be missing a lot, because economics is not telling us enough about lots of things. It's not telling us enough about the cost of when privacy is not protected, about the trade-offs between data and privacy, and about the allocation of benefits of data. So what do I mean by this? For instance, economics, I believe, have not studied enough what happens when privacy goes away. We have studied a lot of things such as what happens when we protect privacy, how advertising effectiveness, e-commerce revenues, venture capital investments may be potentially negatively affected by GDPR, CCPA, or other regulations. We have paid much less attention to the cost of privacy, which are not economic in nature, but they are nevertheless enormous costs, enormous on the individual level. How our personal information could be used to accuse us of crimes that we may not have committed. At the societal level, how personal information can be used to target posts on social media in order to increase user engagement. And all of that is not done maliciously. No engineer working a social media company from Facebook to Twitter is intentionally trying to foment hatred and violence. No way. But of course, this search for engagement, which relies on collecting and exploiting personal information, sometimes can drive behavior which in very, very low probability instances can have catastrophic societal outcomes. We as economists don't study those outcomes, perhaps because they are one, thankfully, in a million. But the point is, my point is, I wonder sometimes whether my field is missing the forest for the tree. And this is particularly problematic, considering that sometimes in our own writings, we don't exercise caution in delimiting the scope and the implications of our results. What do I mean by this? And I use again Posner as an example, because not because I want to attack Posner, but because he's such an intellectual giant. And I feel his contributions are such that they are not diminished by the mild respectful criticism I'm moving now. Posner, in another paper about privacy, noted that he would sidestep the definition of problems privacy, because he knew that privacy can mean different things, by saying one aspect of privacy, important to us economists, is the concealment of information. Okay, so essentially Posner was saying, I focus on this aspect of privacy. Okay, good. So that means that there are other aspects. But then in the same paper, in the end, Posner also said that in the perspective offered by economics, the recent legislative emphasis on favoring individual privacy stands revealed as another example of perverse government regulation of socioeconomic life. Do you see what is happening here? So the paper starts by saying, I will focus on this aspect, but then ends by making a very, very broad criticism and attack on privacy regulation in general. This is problematic. I hope I was clear in explaining why I find it problematic. So that was one aspect that I feel economics has not investigated enough. So the cost of privacy invasions. Another aspect that I believe we have not studied enough is, are more data, more privacy really so antithetical as they may sound? Can we have the cake and eat it too? We can, to some extent, perhaps, thanks to what I like to call privacy-preserving analytics, all these tools from differential privacy to homomorphic encryption, federated learning, k-anonymity, and so on and so forth, which computer scientists and statisticians have been building and analyzing for now over, depends on which technology specifically, but in the case of differential privacy, about 10, 15 years. Homomorphic encryption dates back to even earlier than that. The problem is that we don't have much social science, and specifically, we don't have much economic research on what happens when these technologies are deployed. There is a paucity of economic research on their outcomes. And in fact, the little research that there is, because or rather, the conventional wisdom about the deployment of this technology is that they reduce the value of data, which to some extent they do, sure, but I wonder whether sometimes the criticism are a little unfair. For instance, when the US Census, under the leadership from the research side of John Abbott, push for deploying differential privacy as a tool for disclosure of census data, the reaction was positive among some scholars and very negative among other scholars, as well as some politicians and other groups. You see here some headlines attacking from different angles the application of differential privacy to US Census data. This is a topic that I find incredibly interesting. As a matter of fact, if I can plug another study that I've been lucky to write with a number of colleagues at CMU, in a recent study published last year in Science. Well, okay, we're in 24, so it's now no longer last year, it's 1 year and a half ago. We studied the impact of deploying differential privacy on census data in the context of Title I grants, which is one important application of US Census data, and we compare the misallocation of Title I grants due to differential privacy to the misallocation due to just error in data. And we show that, yes, there is some misallocation due to applying differential privacy, yes, but it's so small, so marginal compared to the misallocation arising from data error. So when we attack differential privacy, we should fair to attack it because we need debate. We need scholarly debate, no doubt, but we should also keep in mind the forest, not just the tree, the bigger picture. Should we perhaps spend more attention, not on the purported negative implication of differential privacy, but on data error and other things that we could actually control in order to improve the accuracy of our analysis. And finally, and this is the part of the last, the part of my talking to which I will devote the last 10 minutes or so. What do we really know? What do we really know about the economic benefits of data? This sounds like a provocative question because I'm going to challenge that more data means more economic value. Well, not really. I do think that data can create economic value. But the key question that I believe we are not studying enough is who is getting that value? In economic terminology, how are the benefits, the economic benefits, the economic surplus produced, generated by consumer data, how are they allocated to different stakeholders? And this is the narrow part of the talk, where I focus on a particular study, which is unpublished, but we presented it a few places. Your feedback and criticism will be most welcome because we're about to submit it to a journal. And the study is kind of inspired by an interview, which I often cite in my talks, by a online advertising director who presented behavior online advertising, the kind of advertising that we are all used to, in which our data used to target specific ads based on our inferred preferences. This behavioral advertising is presented as an economic win-win, something that benefits everyone. It benefits publishers, it benefits consumers because they see ads more valuable to them. It benefits merchants because they can allocate scarce advertising budget to the consumers more interested in the products, and so on and so forth. And I've always wondered, in fact, pretty much this has been the focus of my research in the past 5 years or so. Is this true? Is it true from a theoretical economic perspective? And is it true from an empirical economic perspective? Let's start with the theory. If we use economic theory, we can certainly make a model under which what we see on this slide is true. And the economic model is a model of a two-sided platform market. There are consumers and publishers on one side, merchants on the other. Consumers want to find merchants, merchants want to find consumers. Each side faces cost to find the other. The data economy intermediaries, the Facebook and the Google of the world, Meta and Alphabet, by virtue of having so much data, they can play matchmakers. By playing matchmakers, they reduce search costs on both sides of the market, and by reducing search costs, they create wealth. So these little arrows mean wealth is being spread out. Okay, that's a search cost argument. It is a legitimate argument. But the issue I'm making is that that's not the only theoretical argument one can make. This is another theoretical argument that I think is as plausible as the first theoretical argument. We have, once again, a two-sided platform market with the same players. But now we focus on the fact that consumers have finite budget and attention. They cannot buy everything presented to them through the ads, and they cannot see all the ads presented to them. So publishers are competing very aggressively for that limited consumer attention, and merchants are also competing very aggressively for this limited consumer budget. But instead, in the middle, we have oligopoly, because although the online advertising economy is very complex and vast, it is dominated by few players. So under this version of the story, which doesn't focus on search costs, but focuses on degree of market competition, where would you expect most of the surplus to go? But of course, in the middle, right? Because the two sides are competing very aggressively, so they reduce profits. Most of the profit goes in the middle. So I'm not saying that one story is more correct than the other. Perhaps they are both correct to some extent. Perhaps both dynamics may be happening. The problem is that we don't know empirically, because again, I believe that my field has not studied enough the allocation of value from data. We tend to take for granted this story. And we tend to focus mostly on advertising effectiveness or targeted ads. We show that targeted ads have higher click-through rates and conversion rates than non-targeted, and we stop there. And for publishers, we tend to show that publishers get more per impression. Per impression, they get more money when they sell targeted ads, when they don't. But that's a limited perspective. It's a per impression perspective. If you look at cross impressions, you realize that targeted advertising is both a source of revenues for publishers and a source also of competition for publishers, because it means the publishers now, the New York Times, has to compete with a gazillion other content creators online, which can also behaviorally target their visitors. But you know who has received very little attention? Us, the consumers. There is very little empirical validation of the claim that consumers benefit from behavior targeted ads. In fact, I will claim, and again, I'm not trying to sound provocative here, I'm going to claim that the value that consumers derive from this particular type of advertising is more often posited claim than actually demonstrated. Now, this may sound overly aggressive, so allow me to explain precisely what I mean. The industry claim is that behaviorally targeted ads provide consumers with more relevant products and services. And yes, there is data that, as I mentioned, suggests that these ads have higher click-through rates. But this, from an economic perspective, only tells us that these behavioral ads reduce search costs, if at all. Let's stipulate that they do. They reduce search costs, but if you think as an economist, you realize that search costs are just one part of a consumer utility function. What about the prices the consumers pay when they buy through behavior targeted ads? What about the quality of the vendors they end up buying from when they click on the behavior targeted ads? Because those are also important things from a perspective of consumer welfare and consumer utility. But I know no study that has tried to tackle that, because most studies focus on simply advertising effectiveness. They don't have a counterfactual to oppose to the reduction in search cost and increasing click-through rates. And that's why we ran a series of studies online with Eduardo Mustri and Idris Ajeri, in which we had people pick up ads that were presented on their browsers and then copy the links of their ads and share it with us, so that we could visit the same URL that the consumer experimental participant would have seen had they click on the ad, and therefore we could collect information about the product, including the price, what the vendor of the product was, et cetera, and then we search for competitors of these products, either identical products sold by another online vendor or competing products. So not exactly the same product, but something competing with it. And then this is sort of a kind of within subject design, we compare characteristics of the product that had been directly targeted to the consumer to the characteristics of the product that could have been found, the counterfactual through search. And what we found when we focus on prices and quality of the vendors, we found something quite surprising. We found that if you look at Better Business Bureau ratings of the vendors, and you know, Better Business Bureau ratings go from A+ to F or not found. F is terrible. F is the kind of vendor that doesn't send you the product or sends you a damaged product. When we look for those and we compare the distribution of ratings, Better Business Bureau ratings among vendors in ad versus search, there are very significant differences. In search, it's much more likely that you find good vendors. Among ads, it's much more likely, 4 times as likely that you find F-rated vendors. And this was study 1, was surprising to us. So we did a replication study. Study 2, we got the same results. What about prices? Again, we look at the logo prices in ads versus in search, and we find a difference which is not just statistically significant, is also in economic terms is measured because these are log transformations. So essentially, the product in the ads cost more than the competing product found in search. So this is just a little piece of the larger puzzle, right? But I'm not claiming that we have addressed entirely the question of what are the consumer welfare implications of behavioral ads, or the even broader question of what is the allocation of benefits in the data economy. Not at all. But in our narrow study, we are seeing that there is at the very least, it's not so obvious to me that we can say that behaviorally targeted ads increase consumer welfare. At the very least, we should have a debate about what is really happening from the economic perspective. Which brings me, in my last 2 minutes, back to the bigger picture, which I had promised, which is reverting back in time what I've been trying to do with you today. I've been trying to claim that the economics of privacy has had an amazing ride in the past 40 years. It's fantastic. It is exciting. Sophistication in the field has increased. Number of people working in the field has grown up. That's all fantastic. But I believe we have also missed important research questions. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. There are younger scholars who are now tackling this question. That makes me super happy, super excited for the future. So that we will not only focus just on the benefits of data without understanding who really benefits, and without only attacking privacy regulation and privacy protection. And I've claimed that narrow view that has permeated to some extent my field is due, I claim, to what I call an original sin, a very, very narrow definition of privacy, which is not necessarily shared by other communities of scholars studying privacy. Now, to conclude, I started my talk by referring to a giant in economic research, Richard Posner. I want to end with another giant, Jack Hirschleifer, because Jack Hirschleifer was writing at the same time as Richard Posner was writing, and in fact responded to Richard Posner in a paper that didn't get, I believe, necessarily the same attention, just looking at the citation record and then the influence on my field in the last 40 years, but which I believe is very, very important because it tells us that there is hope, that we as economists can capture something richer, more profound than just privacy as concealment. And these are the lines that I would like to quote from Jack Hirschleifer responding to Posner, and the lines that I would like to use to end my talk. Recently, A new territory has been discovered by economists, and is referring indeed to Posner, Stiglitz. The content that we call privacy. The pioneers are our leaders, peerless leaders, Posner, Stiglitz. Their attitude toward privacy is on the wall hostile. But have they possibly mistaken the peninsula for the mainland, the foothills for the Grand Sierra? Essentially, if they look at too narrow an aspect of privacy and miss the bigger picture, we'll be contending, says Rice Schleifer, that the mainland of privacy is not the idea of secrecy, as our pioneers appear to believe. Secrecy is only an outlying peninsula. What we really mean by privacy is autonomy within society. And I hope that we, as economists, will always keep this in mind. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. This was such an interesting analysis and really dissection of where we are with privacy and behavioral economics, and where we maybe should be going in this field, and also kind of opening it up to the larger scholar community. And with that, I think I'm really excited to invite our two other panelists onto our virtual stage. We have Dr. Kirsten Martin with us. She's the William P. and Hazel B. White Professor of Technology Ethics and is Professor of IT Analytics and Operations in the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame. And Dr. Martin is a nationally recognized expert in privacy, technology, and corporate responsibility. And then we have Dr. Nazanin Andalibi. Naz is Assistant Professor at the School of Information, and she directs the Marginality in Socio-Technical Systems research group here. And her research focuses on the interplay between marginality and technology. For example, as part of her NSF career grant, she examines the ethical, privacy, and justice implications of emotion AI technologies in different high-stakes contexts. And the audience is welcome to suggest questions. We will try to interweave it in the discussion as much as we can for the last couple of minutes here. And let's kick off the discussion. So first, Naz, Alessandro discussed the problem of how much of this research has kind of often focused on a very narrow definition of privacy, focused on concealment or maybe like monetary benefits or harms. When we want to understand the complexity and how does this argument that we need to kind of widen our understanding of privacy, how does it resonate with your own work around people's disclosure decisions online?
Thank you, Alessandro, for the wonderful talk. I loved this argument that you were making around kind of this broadening our understanding of privacy. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing in this space has been kind of on the other side of the scale that you were showing, right? And so I have been drawing a lot from, for instance, Altman's way of looking at privacy and how do people regulate their boundaries on that perspective. And I think what that gives us is an understanding of a range of different factors that shape people's decisions and what they end up sharing with whom and in what context and to what extent, and then what that means for how they're managing their privacy. So for instance, with and that kind of change across different social media spaces, for instance, depending on the different affordances and features that people might have available to them across different contexts. So broadly speaking, I think kind of finding ways to use the methodological strengths of behavioral economics approaches together with I think perhaps the depth of understanding that kind of the other side of this scale can provide. I think I would love to see that happen in privacy research.
Great, yeah. So would I. Kirsten, Alessandro kind of talked a bit about like how there's a lot of focus on companies maybe, and not so much on the consumers and the individuals whose privacy is at stake in some of this research. You study corporate responsibility among other aspects. Do you feel from your work, are companies doing enough to protect the consumers and the users' privacy? And if not, how might they be incentivized to do so?
Oh, the second part of your question, that is a tough one. I think that Alessandro's point around how economics has been framing privacy, it's hard to underestimate how much that idea, the original sin idea, has infected the way that industry argues about privacy and the way, because our laws in the United States are based on economics, it's infected public policy around privacy. And so while we flippantly say things like, or just in our general conversations about giving up privacy when you go online, it really impacts the way firms think about it. And so I sometimes like to say that we need to give them a chance to kind of exercise themselves of this old infection of the old way of thinking about it. And that's why Alessandro's work is so incredibly important within economics, because a lot of the work within business schools is based on theories in economics. And so it impacts the way that people in business schools frame privacy and teach it to people, and the same in law schools as well. And so at the moment, we see companies actually, in two different ways. They sometimes will say people give up their privacy when they go online, especially if they're being asked to be regulated, and that then they'll show people disclosing, they'll still NAS and say, look, people disclose information and they disclose it in different ways. And so they don't care, or they're heterogeneous, or they're unconcerned, and that type of thing. But it all goes back to this conflation of giving up privacy when you go online or when you share data. And so I think that companies, once they are, I'm not sure that there's a market mechanism for this at the moment because of the way the companies have the data and the amount of disclosure. I wish there was. We tend to focus on that first. But I think once the financial incentive may be that once a few cases don't go their way, that they will come to see the light, and also more work within economics has to occur, like Alessandro's, and like coming off of Alessandro's work, to show people that, hey, this is very consistent to have privacy expectations and a functioning market. In fact, Ryan Kalo would say there's a love story between markets and privacy recognition, and that you can't have markets when people's privacy is not being respected. And so I think once we see those languages come together, that firms and regulators will be more likely to actually show people companies a path forward around this.
Right. Thank you. Alessandro, I want to give you an opportunity to respond, and also maybe kind of weave in another question there, which is, on the one hand, you kind of talked about how much of this research is informing policy, but maybe it's informing policy not in a way that's maybe holistic enough, right? And but then we see a slew of regulation around privacy lately. Europe has the General Data Protection Regulation. California has a Consumer Protection Act. We have it feels like every month a new state in the US ratifies a privacy law. In Europe, we have something like the Digital Services Act, which aim to curtail platform power among these large companies. We're talking about AI regulation, right? It's on the horizon. What do you think these regulations are getting right, and where might they not be going far enough? And what is maybe the responsibility as researchers to, what are the research we're not doing to give them better information?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. It's a clear question. It's a very difficult question in that I feel that with my background, I can only go so far in discussing regulation, and past that point, it becomes really an opinion, and my opinion is worth anyone else's opinion. What I think is being done right is that there is finally an effort to regulate the EU directive and GDPR, and then in California, and then efforts forever being talked at the federal level for a privacy bill are an important direction. After, especially in the United States, we rely for too long on essentially notice and consent regimes. Effectively, meaning in practice, if not literally in the law, the problem of recent regulations, including, to be honest, even GDPR, is that I don't know precisely why, perhaps either through the process of lobbying, which eventually led to the final text of the regulation, or perhaps because once there is a regulation, there is always someone who finds a way to kind of bypass it. And Florian, your research, your empirical research on the notices, GDPR notices in Europe also provides evidence of that. So the problem is that too often we go back, even after these attempts to regulate privacy, we go back to notice and consent under other clothing. Essentially, we go back to creating these frameworks where consumers are responsibilized, terrible term for a terrible phenomenon, to take charge of their privacy. And I don't think that's the way to go. Not because I believe that we consumers are stupid or we shouldn't have a say in our privacy. I don't mean that at all. What I mean is that pushing the burden of protecting privacy onto consumers is untenable. And this, I'm using strong terms here because I feel that the research, not just from me, but from many others, have shown conclusively that due to asymmetric information, which is not ameliorated, in fact, it is made even worse by long privacy policies, due to bound rationality, due to a number of behavioral heuristic, cognitive biases, et cetera, we cannot expect consumers to make continuously 200 correct privacy decisions per day, which is what unfortunately is happening even under the GDPR through these notices that we see when we go to a website and we have to click away to keep reading the content we want. So my fear is that let's change it to the positive twist. My hope is that forthcoming regulation is closer to the original 1980s OECD guidelines, which included elements of notice and consent, although they were not referred with the same terms, but also included baseline safeguards, minimum safeguards of data protection that are there, regardless of notice and consent. I hope we go back to those OECD guidelines, which were written by an organization which had economic interests at heart, right? It's the Organization for Economic Development and Cooperation. So it was not just a group of ethicists, moralists interested in privacy. This was an economic organization who set guidelines, which not always we have been following in the 40 years since those guidelines were proposed.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us full circle because the OECD guidelines are also at the heart of the convention of the Council of Europe, of the 108 Convention, which birthed Privacy Day. So with that, we're almost at the end here, but I want to give each of you like just one moment to maybe share something you're like thinking about, watching about in the privacy space in this year. It can be something, you know, concerning, which as many things in this space are, unfortunately. But if you have a ray of hope that you want to share with the audience, that would also be great. And Nas, do you want to go first? And then we go to Kirsten, and then Alessandro gets the last word.
Yeah, I mean, hope wouldn't be me, but I think, well, I'm doing a collaborative project with some folks at George Mason and University of Maryland. We're looking at how people for whom pregnancy and abortion might be relevant approach existing in the world across different states with very quickly shifting legal and political landscapes. And I think to your point, Alessandro, I think it just becomes so much more harder to predict what potential downstream harms people, like very tangible harms people might face as a result of just existing in the world and, you know, going to a store or, you know, looking for information or whatever. And we see that a lot of what we've seen so far is that a lot of people just have very kind of Handmaid's Tale sort of understanding of what this space is and feel very powerless in actually, even if they feel that they are at risk, actually doing anything meaningful to protect themselves aside from deleting period tracking apps and, you know, things like that. So that's a space I'm, you know, working in these days, and it's hard. I don't really have much hope there. Sorry.
Yeah, it sounds like interesting work. Kirsten.
Sure. I think a lot of times when I talk to folks, they will say, well, isn't this kind of depressing? And isn't there like why should we even try? And so I think this goes to Alessandro's mentioning of responsabilization, of this focus on the consumers to kind of fix everything that's wrong with the internet, when they're just not in the position to do that. But I think if we look at like what's going on right now in the academic discourse with Alessandro and some other work within NBER where Alessandro's work is one chapter, but there's others that are speaking on this as well, that there's just this broader conception of other ways to look at privacy in the marketplace. And if you look at, every state that's talking about it, you do see movement on, trying to hold to account what technology firms are doing with our data, whether that's amplification of certain harmful content, whether that's privacy. And so it's easy to get, I'll be a slight optimist about this. I'm not saying that the companies are doing it themselves, but within academia, regulators, and the general public, there is more critiques of saying, wait a second, we're not taking your answers as a fait accompli anymore. And so, especially if you look at now versus 5 years ago. So that's why Alessandro's work is so critically important, is because it really, you need to have someone with the language and the expertise in the field to kind of hold the mirror up and say, hold on a second, because it just doesn't work for economists aren't going to listen to people who aren't economists, as Alessandro knows. You need to have another economist saying it in the language that they understand. So I would say I'll be a slight optimist right now.
Alessandro, a quick last word.
Absolutely. I'll thank you, Chris. Thank you, Des. I'll be an optimist. I'll end with optimism. Micro reason and macro reason. Micro reason, you see economic departments which historically tended to be quite siloed. You couldn't get tenure unless you publish in only econ journals, AR, QJE, etc. They're opening up to other disciplines. It's inevitable. Interdisciplinarity is in economics as well. The process has taken a long time, but has happened. It's a fact, and this will create cross-pollination, and cross-pollination is good, so there will be more richness in my field of research. That's the first reason for optimism. The macro reason for optimism, and I end really macro, is that, as you know, Florian, we'll be discussing these things. I believe due to work from anthropologists, historians, sociologists, ethnographers, and so on and so forth, the privacy is not a modern invention. The right to privacy may be the conceptual notion of a right to privacy, but the need for privacy is not. I believe it is universal. There are evolutionary roots to that. This ability to alternate public and private, to modulate the degree of exposure of the self to others is eternal. It is part of the human race, and I don't believe that it can be killed. Privacy is not dead, because the drive we have to manage how much of ourselves we open to others and how much we want to keep only for ourselves or for our partners, those close to us, is an eternal need and drive. And that is what gives me some remaining optimism for the future.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I feel like there's so much in there. We could be talking for another hour. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I just want to hand it back to Saul for some closing words. And thank you so much, Alessandro, Nas, and Kirsten, for spending this time with us today.
Wow. So what an event. So many privacy perspectives in a short amount of time. And hey, we even got some multidisciplinary privacy optimism at the end there too, which is heartening to hear. Know that a recording of today's event will be posted out on the Safe Computing website, the event website, in the next few days. Thank you again to Alessandro and our panelists and to those behind the scenes that helped organize this event. But wait, there's more. We're working hard to bring in longtime privacy thinker Michelle Dennedy. We're hoping for that to occur in February. And in celebration of its 40th anniversary, we'll be hosting the 1984 version of the film, 1984 at the Michigan Theater on March 6th. Put it in your calendars now. The event will be free. It's open to the public. More details will be coming soon, so keep an eye on the Safe Computing website at safecomputing.umich.edu and happening at michigan@events.umich.edu. Finally, please take away and think on Erwin Altman's notion of privacy regulation, that building and maintaining an enduring intimate relationship is a process of privacy regulation. As Alessandro and our panelists emphasized, it is personal. This is not legal. It is daily. So thank you again for attending. Hope to see you at upcoming Privacy at Michigan events, and we'll be seeing you. Thanks.